الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, listeners. Today we're diving into a milestone that often sneaks up on many. That is turning 40. It's a decade that brings reflection and growth, and for many men, a shift in priorities, mindset, and even emotional well-being. At this stage, men often face unique challenges, balancing career pressures, family responsibilities, health concerns, and even a sense of identity. And questions start creeping in like, am I where I thought I'd be? What's next? How do I handle the emotional and mental changes that come with this new chapter? In today's discussion, we're going to explore the mental and emotional shifts that men experience at 40, the midlife transitions, and how to embrace this phase with confidence and a sense of purpose. So whether you're approaching 40, you're already there, or just curious about what lies ahead, today we hope to unpack some of the journey of the 40s and beyond. Joining us on the program today is mental health advocate, life coach and author, Coach Zaid Ismail of ZaidIsmail.com and the Instagram account Coach Zaid Ismail. Coach Zaid, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Radio Islam.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's always a pleasure. Jazakallah for having me again.
Alhamdulillah, Ameen, Ameen. So today we're talking about turning 40, and that is such a big milestone, even Islamically as well, that is such a profound age. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges or shifts, rather, that men experience at this stage of life, both mental and emotional?
Oh boy, I think I'm going to upset the apple cart today quite a lot because I think the moment, and yes, I agree that as an Islamic point of reference, it has significance because of the age of Nubuwah. But beyond that, the moment we're tracking ourselves against age, we already got a problem. And that's probably why we have the midlife crisis kind of issues that people experience around the age of 40. And the reason I say this is the moment you're tracking against age, you're not focused on who you are and what you're about and what you've accomplished and how you're tracking in your life. You're comparing yourself to everyone else that's that age.
We find that many men feel so pressured that they need to have life figured out. Something like, when I'm 40 now, I'm no more in my youth, I'm not old as yet, but I'm 40. It's somehow like I've got to know and figure out my life. And where do these type of expectations come from? And second to that, what is it that men who are approaching 40 can do to navigate this pressure, this expectation in a realistic way?
I was speaking to, and I don't know how relevant this is, but it just seems to resonate with this point you're asking me about. I was speaking to an anthropologist, about this concept of childhood and how it is that we need to cherish our childhood and then become adults. And apparently it's a concept that's only developed in the last 100 plus years or so. It's not something that we've had from the beginning of time. And the reason this is important relative to this discussion is because the moment I expect myself to be an adult at a certain age, or I need to have a certain level of responsibility at a certain age, again, I'm tracking against the wrong milestones. And that's why these conversations always remind me of the youth that were extremely accomplished and mature and responsible in the past generations. Even from the Sunnah itself, we know of the 16-year-old, I think it was, that was the leader of an army. So when we look at it from that perspective, we have to wonder, why do we place so much emphasis on age rather than how much emphasis we place with what we're doing with the time we have in those years? Because then it's not about whether I'm a child or not. It's about whether I am capable. And it doesn't mean I have to give up my childlike fun behaviors and tendencies. It just means I have to regulate it and moderate it relative to what the situation or the circumstance calls for.
That is so refreshing, even I think for women themselves, to hear that. And absolutely, that's just quite a game changer. Yeah.
So the moment,
Go ahead, please go ahead.
No, Marv. So the moment we start looking at, I'm now 40. I'm going to be 40. I'm turning 50 even because it's another one as well that comes in. Or in fact, even teenagers that are now turning 20, that's the first time you really feel old, right? So whenever we turn these numbers, if anything, it can give us a reason for pause. But that's not the basis on which we should actually be tracking when we want to achieve things. I shouldn't want to achieve something at the age of, because if it takes me, let's use it as an example. If I say I want to achieve something at the age of 40, right? Then, and I'm currently 30, but the actual effort and meaningful exertion that I need to do to achieve what I want to achieve at the age of 40, it only requires, say, a year. What am I doing with the other 9 years? And that's how we create opportunity to procrastinate. We create opportunity to put things out because, yeah, we still have time, we still have time, we still have time. But you don't have time because everyone says tomorrow is not guaranteed, but everyone lives as if it is. And that's what we do when we look at 40. We're turning 40, what now?
Yeah. So, quick question. Midlife crisis. Reality of this. You.
Midlife crisis is a phantom, I think. I think a midlife crisis is a point of self-indulgence, and I know this is going to get a lot of flack, but it's a self-indulgence to look at what did I achieve, what did I do relative to what I thought I set out for myself in my youth. And then you look at it and you turn around and you look at your life and you think, yeah, well, I made my life about everyone else around me. I am now such a responsible father or husband or whatever it is. And then I realized that, oh, hold on, what about all of the things that I wanted to do for myself? What happened to my hobbies? What happened to my interests? What happened to my passions? And suddenly it feels like I did not do justice to myself. And then suddenly I need to prioritize what I want because I don't feel like anyone else around me is prioritizing me. And that, I think, is probably core to a midlife crisis. It's like, what about me?
Right. Self-indulgence.
I believe it is.
Yeah, it does. It does make a lot of sense. Let's talk for a moment, if we can, about the emotional and mental health for men 40 and above. There are a lot of support networks and resources for women on this. And we often talk about women going through hormonal changes, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. Take us through that in terms of what men experience. Do they experience something similar in their 40s, in their 50s, as women do?
I think men are less likely to attribute it to hormonal changes, right? But we know that men do have hormones as well. But because men are more wired to be pragmatic and practical and logical about things, because we're problem solvers, we won't look at it from the emotional perspective. We'll try to solve the problem. Like if we see that we haven't done justice to a certain project that we wanted to do as a passion project for our life, then that's a problem we need to solve. And the solution to that problem is indulgence or renewed investment in it. Because if I've neglected something, then the way to solve that problem is to stop neglecting it. So if I arrive at 40 and I think, well, I've neglected myself and I've neglected what's important to me and what I wanted to always achieve and the legacy I wanted to leave, then if it hits me hard enough at 40 that I've now abandoned or I've neglected that, the solution to that is to start prioritizing it. And then I'm not going to look at it within the context of everything else that I've accomplished that I never thought I would or that I didn't even realize was important in the first place. I'm just going to diminish everything else that has legitimacy in my life. And I'm going to prioritize this thing that is supposed to be my legacy project. And then in my mind, because I'm problem solving, I'm going to look at everything else around me and I'm going to think, well, yeah, I did enough here. My family's set up quite nicely. My children are getting a good education. My wife can't complain about what it is that I'm giving her and providing for and all of that. And I'm doing my job as a provider, protector. So now it's my turn. and then we lose it because we don't consider all the fulfillment that we should be getting from all of those other accomplishments. And if we're not getting fulfillment from there, that's the problem to solve.
So with all of this, and with men being very pragmatic, solution focused, do many of them seek out mental health well-being? Do many men in their 40s and 50s have a mental first aid toolkit that they can dive into and use?
I think that's a difficult one, right? Because part of this problem solving nature of men, and that's why a lot of men will hear that things about mental health, and they'll think, well, that doesn't apply. It doesn't. It's not for me. And the reason is because they don't interpret the challenges they're experiencing as mental health challenges. They see it as a practical problem. And if they're overwhelmed with the volume of problems they have versus the resources, time, and solutions that they have accessible to them, then that feels like stress. But to them, it's not that they have unhealthy stress, they just see it as a legitimate reason to stress because the demands are greater than the opportunities to attend to those demands. So for men, it's not. It doesn't usually feature. Not from my experience, anyway. It doesn't feature for them to think about mental health in that regard when it comes to the practical demands placed on them. When they do, and alhamdulillah, over the last couple of years, there is a definite uptake in the number of men who are making themselves available to have these conversations. But most of the time, those conversations are focused around how it is that they understand their place and their contribution in the lives of the people around them, not the practical things that they need to achieve. So men don't come and talk about, I don't know how to be a provider, or I don't know how to be enough for my wife. They come to talk about why it is that no matter what they do is not enough. And that's a very different
So let's
mental
talk
health
a bit
problem.
about, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it is, definitely, definitely. How do you, let's talk then a bit about the social aspect. Um, what, if anything, changes for men 40 and above when it comes to social circles and friendships, nurturing that or building new friendships? We often hear about men as they get older going into their 40s and 50s who then take up a new sport or a new something new, like physical activity. Um, is that something we're seeing as part uh, of moving into the next age bracket? It doesn't have to do much with the friendships that they build, the new friendships, or just maintaining the current friendships through new sports and hobbies and activities.
From my side, I think, and I'm speaking purely from what I've observed and witnessed and what I experienced personally, I'm not aware of any men who go out deliberately trying to establish new social groups and structures as they go on later in life. It's usually long held friendships or relationships that are developed in a common space that they carry with them. So I'm not aware of a major drive from a man's perspective to want to get into social clubs, for example. But there would be a lot of activity around common interests. Like if you see that there's a lot of soccer dads that get together, then they would have their interest and they would potentially get together to go and do other things like maybe play paddle or tennis or just fishing or whatever it is. So the way men seem to socialize, and I'm saying seem to because I'm not a big social animal myself, so I'm speaking with caution here. But from what I've observed in the kind of men that I speak to as clients in that, their relationships that they cherish with other men are usually either siblings or friends that they've had for a long time. It's not people that they encounter now and then suddenly they strike up a friendship with them. Men are not that sociable in that regard unless there's like a very real strong bond of interest in a common project, for example. Then the interest in the project is what will then lead to them becoming better kind of acquaintances and then friends maybe. But it's not something that they set out to first look for a friend as a social bond and then find an interest along with them. And so for men to approach it in to have the social kind of bonds, to have that problem solved, it's usually significantly more complex than what a woman would, because a woman is inclined towards social interaction and nurturing. So having that sentimental connection with others is comes a lot more naturally. But for a man, that's like, what's the point? Well, why should I?
Right. Listeners, we are speaking to Coach Zaid Ismail. The website is zaidismail.com, spelled ZAIDISMAIL, zaidismail.com. You can also, through the website and through the Instagram account as well, learn more and click on the podcast on Substack. So it's coachzaidismail.substack.com, where you can find his podcast up there or on YouTube as well. We're talking to Coach today about men turning 40 and beyond. What's that like? What are the challenges? What is the growth, the reflection that comes at the stage? And also, what are the myths around the age of 40 or 40 and above for men? When we talk about the age of 40, Coach, what impact does turning 40 have in general, would you say, on relationships, on marriage?
I think because of the stigma associated with turning 40, a lot of people go into self-created crisis mode.
Okay.
Because they start evaluating whether they've accomplished enough, or how are they perceived by society. Are they successful? Do they have the kind of life that they always wanted? Do they still have enough time to travel, which is another big thing that always comes up these days, is we want to travel. But when I speak to people like that and I ask them, well, what's the big deal about all of these things, and they can't tell me what's of substance in their current life that they believe is enough. And that's the thing. If you don't have fulfillment in your life with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, if you don't see the value of it, then you're going to be looking for this fulfillment that you believe you don't have because time is running out. So when people turn 40, and because of this massive unhealthy emphasis on 40 and 50 and all of these milestones of age-related stuff, it's just a distraction, and people who are not generally paying attention to the bigger cause of their life, they would be more inclined towards evaluating their progress at that point, because other than that, they don't really reflect on it.
Rightly so. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely.
So the problem to solve there is, why is it that we wait for external superficial milestones before we reflect on whether we're tracking well in life or not, whether we're doing something meaningful or
Yeah,
purposeful, or are we actually accomplishing anything of significance?
exactly. So we hear a lot about men and women in their 40s, 50s, uh, who may not refer to it as a midlife crisis, but who will use this time to reinvent themselves, how they think they should be perceived by the world, by their communities, their circle, or perhaps reinvent how they dress or how they choose to travel, their hobbies, their lifestyle, their home. Um, what's your take on that, this whole reinvention? You see people in their 40s and 50s sometimes having these major changes in their lives.
I think reinvention is really important. Our willingness to reinvent must be driven by purpose. It mustn't be driven by fear. So we mustn't reinvent ourselves because we're afraid that half our life is gone and we only got maybe 10 or 15 good years before our health is going to start failing and all of that, because that's how you create self-fulfilling prophecies. But also the other thing is that if you're going to look at half your life is gone, then you're working with the assumption that you still got the other half available to you. We don't. We literally don't. Because illness can get us for the rest of our life, a'udhu billah, and that would then give us half of our life, but the quality of life we will be able to experience will be very different to the first half of our life. So that's why this whole idea of age and time is such a distraction, because if I want to reinvent myself, I need to reinvent myself because how I arrived at the point that I'm at, I now realize it's just on a hiding to nowhere. It's not giving me the fulfillment, the peace, the contentment, the social bonds, whatever it is. It's not fueling that value system that I was hoping to live by. And for example, and I don't normally like to talk about examples that's relating to me personally, but I think this one here is apt. When I was in corporate, I didn't reinvent myself to do this, what I'm doing now full time, because I felt a midlife crisis coming on. I did it because I realized that who I was turning into as a person, as a man, as a human in corporate, and what it was demanding of me, the compromises of values and ethics and all of that, I realized that that had reached kind of like fever pitch, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. And that's when I decided I'm exiting corporate, regardless of my career path and everything else, and I'm going to focus on something that I believe is more important, and at the same time, something that I believe was a contributing factor to how I arrived at that point. And that's why I decided to do what I'm doing now. But that reinvention, that happened at the age of 47 for me. So it wasn't a milestone, it wasn't anything else. It was just about, this is the point at which I find myself in life. And relative to this point at which I find myself, I'm not happy. So I want to do something about that. I'm not going to wait for 40. Because, when we wait for 40 or 50, we literally giving ourselves permission to only do something about it at that point. And that's again another problem. You see, the internal conversation, the expectation we set for ourselves, the rationale, the reason, the purposefulness, all of that becomes contaminated, because we're not doing it now because there's conviction in the purpose of it. We're doing it because of the stigma associated with what happens if I don't.
Well, thank you as always for sharing these examples and these instances in your timeline, because it makes it so relatable and helps people know that if they're going through something similar, how to make sense of it. And it provides so much of support, I believe, for people who through this can find it so relatable, because often we may speak to experts on topics or guests who are passionate on certain topics, but it often feels as though they're talking above us. Or it's just very theoretical, and it's difficult to then make sense of that in the real world. So thank you so much, I really appreciate that.
Alhamdulillah.
We talked about this myth of this era of, as you said, self-indulgence. I love that, when it comes to the so-called midlife crisis. But around the age of, we would say maybe late 30s, 40s, 50s, a lot of people, men and women, do experience regret. They talk about it even, regretting why perhaps they had not used their younger years, whether it was to learn or practice the deen, or eat more healthy, or exercise more, or travel more. What is it that can be done to work around or work through that regret or the guilt? Because that can be very heavy to hold on to, but a regret of, a sense of unfulfilled dreams. What would you say to men who are finding themselves in that conundrum?
I think regret it's a natural process we go through when we realize that we might not have done justice to something or someone that we didn't intend otherwise not to do. So experiencing the regret is fair. It's something that's going to happen. It's part of being human. What we do with that regret then becomes important. If we use the regret to feel self-pity, then we're wasting the opportunity. If the regret results in remorse, and the remorse is sincere, it will result in a purposeful kind of recalibration, course correction on our part to do something about it, so that we don't make that same mistake again, or we don't continue with that same mistake. I always tell people, as long as you're breathing, there's hope, right? There's no such thing as I've run out of time, or it's past, there's no point in trying it out now, things like that. There's no shortage of content online on social media and other places where you can see people who have made phenomenal decisions for themselves late in life. And when I say late in life, I'm talking of 60s, 70s, even 80s, and they've completely turned their health around and turned their lives around. So it's about whether you value the time you have versus feeling sorry for the time you've lost. And every moment you spend in regret is wasted time when you can actually do something positive about it, when you can do something purposeful about it. So yes, we are human. We're going to slack. We're going to fall into a slump. But what we do with our realization that we're in that slump, if it comes out as self-pity, then it's because we want other people to cut us slack. It's not because of any pity we feel for ourselves. We want to give people reason to believe that they mustn't judge us harshly because, look, we had all of these other things. We had a difficult life, and that's why we couldn't achieve this, and we couldn't have done that, and all of those. And look how difficult my life is now. So don't judge me because I'm trying my best, and all of these things. Or else, if they don't put that on the outside, then the internal self-loathing, that's also a sign of ingratitude. Self-loathing is ingratitude. It's not humility. So when we lose sight of all of these things, we become self-indulgent. And it sounds like a harsh truth to handle, right? Because we don't mean to be self-indulgent. We think we've got a legitimate reason why it is that we feel the way we do. But it is self-indulgent if the rumination, the thoughts that you keep entertaining in your mind, your internal dialogue, if it's serving no one but you, that is self-indulgent. So if you're going to do something with it and you're going to be of benefit to others, and we know this from the Sunnah, we know this from practical experience, fulfillment in life is in realizing that you are of benefit to others. Now, if you live with conviction and you want to be of benefit to others, regardless of whether they acknowledge that benefit or not, that will give you fulfillment, and that will result in you living purposefully. But if you're going to wait for acknowledgement all the time, if you're going to need people to recognize and appreciate and celebrate, then when you turn 40, it's going to become either a celebration of your accomplishments in life to date and years to another 40 years, so to speak, or it's going to be a moment of asking people to feel sorry for the fact that you've been so selfless that you haven't taken care of yourself, so now they need to allow you some space to do what you need to do for yourself. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. We're talking to Coach Zaid Ismail, and Coach mentioned briefly about self-pity, and you can read more. There's a highlight on Coach's Instagram account. Its handle is Coach Zaid Ismail, and the quote there, it says, "The worst character trait to have is self-pity." The website is zaidismail.com. And we're talking today about the older years, not old, but we're talking 40 and above. And one of the challenges, the mindsets, the stereotypes, the myths that are out there in society, in our communities, that have any influence or impact on people. Many people, Coach, as they move on in life and are settled in a career, perhaps they're heading towards retirement or even not. But you find that as people advance in their age, we often hear about that meaning of life. People are searching for that meaning in life. And in the past, we would see backpackers that were in their 20s, but now see people in their 40s, 50s that are backpacking across the country, across the world, and specifically saying that they're seeking meaning in their life. So meaning and passion and purpose, these are big topics that come up for people, not just the youth, but the generation above them as well. What ways would you encourage people to rediscover this passion, this purpose, this meaning of life, if it's something that they're feeling all of a sudden inclined towards? Tell us more, please.
This brings out the cynic in me, because if we reach an age and we think, what is the purpose of life? Then my question is, what have you been living all this time? Why have you been living it all this time? And that's why we need to be careful about these big philosophical questions that we kind of indulge in. And we think, what is the purpose of life? The purpose of life is simple. It's to be of significance, to be of consequence. That's it. If I know that that my presence and my contribution is of positive impact on the people around me, I feel fulfilled. Simple. But because we've reduced ourselves to role-playing and age groups, we lose that. Because now I'm doing it because it's expected of me. I'm doing it because it's my responsibility. I'm doing it because it's my role. I'm doing it because it's your right over me. And that's why I keep telling people, the moment you start talking about rights and responsibilities, you've lost the plot. Because life is not about rights and responsibilities. It's about balance and harmony and collaboration, and about being of service to each other. Because that's why we want companionship as well. We want companionship for the same reason, because we want to feel significant to someone, and we want them to feel significant because of our efforts to them. And that's what makes a healthy relationship, right? But we've overcomplicated it with these stigmas of modern pop psychology, of how it is that life needs to be broken up into these phases and all of that nonsense. It really doesn't work. Live purposefully and check yourself regularly about whether or not what you think is purposeful is actually purposeful. That's it. Reflection. We don't do enough reflection. That's why we spend so much time with regret later, because we didn't reflect. We didn't stop to take stock and see, well, what am I doing? Why am I always so tired without feeling as if I'm accomplishing anything? And you don't wait until you're 40 to ask that question.
Yes, but yet people do that. People are in their 40s and 50s and saying, well, in my early years I studied and then I had to have a family. I've put them all and putting them through their education, and now that things are settled at work, settled on the home front, I have that breathing space. I may not have ever known about work-life balance, and this is all new to me, but somehow I'm thinking, well, how can I create that balance? How can I bring in more variety into my life? These are the questions that people would ask. Well, where do they start on that point? If for years they've never had that work-life, so-called balance, or they've just left aside all of the hobbies, the passion, the activities, the personal interests, making themselves perhaps sacrificial lamb, a martyr in the process, and now thinking, well, hey, I'd like to get back up and I'd like to do something for myself now. But then again, there's so much of regret that may come up. Where can they start? What's the starting point?
I think the first thing I want to say about that is that one of the biggest myths in mental health is about work-life balance. There is no such thing as work-life balance. There's about whether or not you can regulate your emotional capacity between the emotional experiences you have at work versus home, because we lose sight of that when we become consumed by work, because that defines our level of success and purpose and worth as an individual, because we're driven by our careers. Or the reverse is true then. We become so consumed about our rights and responsibilities at home that work becomes a means to an end and we don't realize it. And then we underperform and we complain about not getting enough advancement in our careers. So when it comes to the whole work-life balance and trying to think of, well, how do I find purpose in life and all of that? My first question is, if you've been going through, say, 40 years of your life, and out of that 40 years, 20 of it has been you serving your family, have you stopped to consider what impact you've had on your family in the way you've served them, not in what you serve them? Because that's what we lose sight of. We're so consumed by the fact that we have to, that we don't pause to consider how it is that others are receiving it as if we want to. Because that's what it is. The person receiving, the child that's receiving my guidance or my correction or my effort to discipline them, they don't see it as me fulfilling my duty. They see it as my father sees me this way. So that means I must be worth so much, or not worth anything at all. My husband sees me this way. And men don't stop to consider that enough anymore. Men have become emasculated because of corporate culture, not because of the way their wives treat them.
Interesting. I've never heard a mental health advocate say that before.
Men have lost the plot because they've become defined by what they do. They've lost sight of the fact that as a man in that social structure, just you occupying that role has massive impact. And if you don't realize what impact you have, you're going to be fighting for significance when just doing what you do already has massive significance. And that's why I honestly believe that men are failing us before women are failing us. And men who are given to midlife crises, this is a cold shower for them maybe, or it's just maybe even offensive. But if you're going through a midlife crisis, understand at the core of it is self-pity. And that self-pity leads to self-indulgence, and self-indulgence leads to an erosion and an abdication of the responsibilities that you have to the people around you who have rights over you. So a midlife crisis, it sounds romantic. It sounds like this amazing notion that, no, it's my turn. I need to spoil myself and indulge myself and everything else. There's impact. And unfortunately, that impact comes at a time when you are most impactful to the people around you, because the more you establish yourself in a role that you're playing for the people around you, the greater the impact of how it is that you show up in that role. So now we're saying that you've got someone who's established their credibility of a certain level over the last 20 years of their life, for example, and suddenly they want to just discard all of that and reinvent themselves for the purpose of having a midlife crisis or being the age of 40. I don't know where we've adopted this mindset from, but it's ludicrous.
Indeed it is. So much to think about. There's always lots to think about and lots to challenge ourselves about and to really go within and introspect. Listeners, if you haven't visited Coach's Instagram account, I highly recommend you do. There are many, many posts and resources that you could benefit from. There are reels and posts specifically talk about these topics in more detail, and you can benefit tremendously. But as well as the YouTube page, the Substack, the podcast on Substack as well. Coach, tell us a bit more about how 2025 has been for you. What projects are you working on? The podcast has gotten up, so that's great. What's 2025 looking like for you in your coaching practice, and how can our listeners connect with you for projects?
Alhamdulillah, I could barely make out the difference between 2024 and 2025. It's just been one big blur. I expected a bit of a slowdown in December and January, and alhamdulillah, it's a good problem to have that there wasn't a slowdown, but also the other side of that is that it just means that there's that many more people who need assistance at this time of year because things have become that much more strenuous to navigate. But the fact that I'm getting a lot more male clients is really encouraging. So for me, that's one of the promising things going into 2025. Personally, I'm honestly not one to even look at dates or timelines in that way. So for me, it's a matter of making sure that what I had set out to accomplish last year or the year before, even if I haven't started on some of it yet, it's a matter of holding myself accountable. And this, for me, has been a theme that I've been more emphatic about over the last year or so, is just keeping myself accountable for the goals and for the projects that I promised myself I would want to actually accomplish. So in line with that, in this year, inshallah, it's going to be the sequel to the novel. It's going to be audiobooks. It's going to be more events. I'm really very keen to relaunch my efforts around events so that we can have more in-person spirited discussions of the kind of topics that I always discuss with you on your show. But talking about how to navigate marriage in these complex times where things have become so convoluted and so hyped up that we've lost the essence of why it is that we do what we do. So inshallah, from that perspective, as far as collaborations are concerned, unfortunately, I found that collaborations turn out to be more of a distraction than anything else because, and I'm open to collaborations, but collaborations for the most part tend to talk to the mainstream narratives that are already prevailing. So the moment you challenge that, because it's not a popular position, almost this democratic mindset sets in where we think that because there's no one else of credibility saying this, it can't be true. And this is, if ever there's a challenge that we face as an ummah, is that we don't have enough critical thinkers. We only look at things based on who the source is. We don't look at it based on what's the merit of what the source is presenting. And that's why I have every joy in being wrong if the person who's challenging what I'm putting out there, they have merit in why they're challenging it rather than just because someone else said something different. So inshallah, in the coming year, we'll see an improvement in the critical thinking that's brought to bear in the public spaces where we have these conversations, and less of the prescriptive, monotonous, mainstream pop psychology nonsense that is actually being pushed there. Because at some point, we need to realize that the more popular mainstream mental health has become, the more dysfunctional our homes have become. Someone needs to recognize that that is the reality. So at some point, we need to take stock of what is it that is beneficial, because there's nothing so bad that there is no good in it. So there's some benefit in it, but we discarding the wisdom of the ages. And we're also discarding a lot of the Islamic wisdom that we've been raised with, because mainstream mental health now defines some of those Islamic practices as toxic or abusive. So all the billah from in this regard, I place the blame squarely on men, because men have not led in this role. They've not taken up the leadership role that they're supposed to have. They only focus on the privilege of leadership, and they emphasize their rights and their rights that they have. But they haven't actually led people. They haven't inspired the ummah. They keep beating the ummah down into submission for compliance. And I'm hoping that men who turn 40 will start reconsidering that contribution to the ummah rather than the contribution to their own life.
Indeed, we need that, absolutely. Well, we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses this, all your projects and the year ahead, gives you barakah in your time,
Ameen.
your health, grants you plenty of afiyah, expands your vision to serve the ummah and humanity. And it's wonderful to hear that many more men are reaching out. That was actually going to be my next question is, are we having more men now reaching out, seeking that coaching, that support, and it's really good to hear about that. Also good to hear that there'll be in-person events, because as you mentioned, there is such a need and a thirst in our ummah for critical thinkers and for, as you mentioned earlier, reflection, how important it is to reflect regularly. And I think those two go hand in hand. We have a shortage of critical thinkers, and we have very few people engaged in reflection or reflective thinking, contemplation and pondering, and that seems to be something that's amiss in our ummah at this stage. Listeners, if you'd like to know more about Coach Zaid's coaching, you can go to the website, it's zaidismail.com. You can go to zaidismail.com/FAQ, and all the questions that you may have, whether it's about his approach, how the sessions work, anything you want to know about it will be available on the website, and you can read up there, and you can sign up there directly as well, whether it's for coaching, the books, or to access the podcasts as well. Coach, Jazakumullah khair for being with us today, for sharing with us, most importantly for creating the space for us and our listeners to really go inward, to think, to reflect, to introspect, and to start challenging the thoughts or the information as well that's out there as well. If there were any last words you have to share with our listeners, specifically to our male listeners, who may be, again, age 40 and above, and much of what you've shared is something that they can resonate with, what would your last words be to them?
I think the one thing I want men to realize is that if it's relative to the age of 40, understand that the first 40 years of your life is for the accumulation of wisdom. The second 40 years of your life, inshallah, is for the application of that wisdom. It's not to prepare for retirement. And the more we realize this, the more we'll be able to take up the mantle of the leadership roles that have been abandoned, and we'll be able to carry forward the role of the elders that has also been largely abandoned in our communities and in our family units. Is because people are receding into the space of, I've done my duty, I've paid my dues, and now it's time for me to rest. There is no rest until the day you die. And whether you find joy in how you're exerting yourself, that is up to you. That is not up to the people around you. And the more men realize the impact that they have, inshallah, the more they will find fulfillment in having that impact, and the people around them will respond in a way that demonstrates the value and the wisdom that Allah has created us with, of why that impact is so important.
Absolutely. Jazakumullah khair. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much for that. As always, such a pleasure to connect with you. I'm always taking back so much and learning. Listeners, we will be sharing the podcast link closer to the time up on our website as well, and where you can listen to the podcast, play back on it, and share it with others as well. Jazakallah khair, Coach, for joining us today, and we look forward to chatting to you soon. We send dua for barakah and goodness and khair in all of your work, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
On our program today, Coach for Life, author and mental health activist, Coach Zaid Ismail. It's zaidismail.com. We're talking about the age of 40 and up ahead for men, mental health, and emotional well-being. The program will be up on Radio Islam's website as a podcast, where you can listen, download, and share with others. We'll join you again on the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.